Whoa, whoa, whoa.
Right, did you see that, mate? Have you got permission to be here? I don't care. No, you don't.
You shouldn't be here.
Sir, turn the camera off now, please. Turn the camera off.
On 28th March 2017, 15 activists broke into Stansted Airport and chained themselves to a plane. A year on, they were facing the possibility of life in prison. From the peasants' revolt to the suffragettes to Greenham Common, Britain has a long and rebellious history of protest. But the terror-related charge the Stansted 15 face, that was unprecedented. The deportation they prevented is part of the legacy of the so-called hostile environment outlined by Theresa May in 2012 when she was Home Secretary. Over 50 people were on the plane, 11 of whom have been allowed to remain in the country to appeal their case. In other words, the Stansted 15 are being threatened with life in prison for giving the British government enough time to correct their mistakes. Why was it important to you to put yourself in the firing line like that?
You get to a point where you know that you can do something and you have no choice but to act.
How does it feel when you look at a potential sentence like that? What goes through your head?
On some level, pure panic, and it's really scary. And I've sort of been asking myself, like, wait, did you do this again, Emma? Was this really a good idea?
The Stansted 15 case has brought the government's deportation policy back into the spotlight, and I wanted to find out more about these chartered deportation flights. So what's your field of study?
My work's on immigration control broadly, but specifically on deportation.
Why do you think the government started amping up the number of deportations?
I think partly it's that people were moving more, and partly it was that there wasn't the requirement for labour in the same way. So the response of states has been to kind of increase the forms of control on people who might be here without status. The first kind of immigration controls in the 60s were about colonial migrants, like my grandparents. And from then, the kind of question of immigration was always set up as a question of race relations. It was often about preventing people when they arrived at the border. And it has become a kind of massive system of incarceration.
And does government keep tabs at all on what happens to these people when they do get deported to their countries of origin?
No, there is no obligation. And in some ways, you can think of deportation as a kind of disappearing. They're home, they're in the country of their citizenship, and they're the responsibility of the state to which they're a national.
Would you describe the current immigration system as racist?
Yes. The Home Office would say that they're only discriminating on the basis of people's income and on the basis of their nationality. But the history of the world is one in which poverty, nationality and race are not independent variables. So in the Jamaican context, the Jamaican government are encouraged to accept their nationals back, connected to packages around development assistance, aid and investment. So it really relies on an incredible form of colonial amnesia. And so even though calling that racist might seem controversial, how else do you explain the imbalance of power there between the UK and its former colonies?
I returned to Chelmsford for the first day of the trial, where a small group of supporters had gathered to join the defendants. The charge brought against the group is rare, originally created after the Lockerbie aeroplane bombing in 1988. The Crown Prosecution Service have come under criticism for misuse of the law, but insist that it's not a terrorist charge. So how are you feeling today?
I'm feeling really good. I'm just really happy that it started at last now. And we've got so many supporters saying we need to stop charter flights, we need to end mass deportations.
Thank you everybody for showing up today on this really freezing Monday morning. This trial got moved 3 times. 15 of our friends are facing trial for 6 weeks for stopping a deportation charter flight. As a result, over 30 people were not deported. People were able to continue their cases and be reunited with their loved ones, with their families, with their friends. That's a huge result. But now the British state is really escalating its use of deportation charter flights. This regime is brutal, it's racist, it's hostile, it's inhuman.
Mel, Emma, and the rest of the Stansted 15 didn't stand trial that day. Having put their lives and careers on hold, the case was adjourned until further notice. Meanwhile, the men and women on the plane that the Stansted 15 blocked are still fighting for the right to remain. One of them is May, who is up for deportation after being in this country for 28 years. When did you first hear about the Stansted 15?
When we were taken in the coach to Stansted Airport to be deported, all what we heard was there was a protest that they should not deport people. It makes me feel at least there's some people who care, who are there to say, you don't do this to people.
Were you told way in advance that you were going to be deported?
No, it was that day. They said their coach is waiting for us. My body was numb, completely frozen. I mean, this is a country I've been for 28 years. I left my country for prosecution because I was heavily abused. I came to this country, my life was saved. If I wasn't in this country, I probably would have died. And taking me back there, it's like taking me to my death warrant.
A lot had changed in the past 7 months, and Emma had recently found out she was pregnant. Meanwhile, the Stansted 15 were preparing to finally start their trial. Tell me what you guys have been up to since the last time I saw you, which you were entering the court.
Wow.
Yeah. Feels like so long ago.
Well, it is.
Yeah.
So long ago.
In a sense, everybody knows how painful it is to wait. And I think this experience for us has been much worsened by it taking so long. It's 18 months since we took action. The consequences have become much more potentially life-altering for us. The delay just feels like a part of that pattern of making this process as punishing as possible and trying to discourage other people from doing what we did. And 6 weeks just looks like this sentence already.
Like today, I felt a real wave of anxiety come over me. The court is making it very clear who's in control.
The next day, I meet Mel and Ruth at the courthouse. Today, the activists had support from another solidarity demonstration and mainstream politicians.
Friends, I also want to say on the specific issue that the Green Party is with you absolutely clearly and unequivocally. It isn't just about ending indefinite detention. It is about ending detention, full stop, and shutting them down.
Why is the Green Party standing behind the Stansted 15?
It feels very much like we're at a crossroads in a number of areas. First of all is with regard to the hostile environment that's been perpetuated by this government. And as the Stansted 15 showed, when they stopped that deportation flight, people were then able to appeal and they got the right to stay. They should never have been on that flight. These people are now on trial for saving people's lives. They're facing a life sentence under anti-terror laws. So this is part of a wider picture about clamping down on the right to protest. We're calling on the Crown Prosecution Service to drop the charges. We're also using this to highlight the issue of deportations and raise awareness, because a lot of people out there don't know this is actually going on, don't know this is the kind of country that we've become.
The Green Party haven't been the only political party to express their concern over deportation flights. But very few politicians have seen the hostile environment up close, or even managed to visit detention centres such as Yar's Wood, except Diane Abbott.
Lovely to meet you, Diane.
Lovely to meet you.
What do you think of deportation flights?
Deportation flights are about politics. It's about the government trying to prove that it can be as harsh and draconian as possible with migrants. They're not necessary and they're inhumane. When you bundle people out on a deportation flight and you haven't actually checked their status, there's a big possibility of injustice.
It's hard not to realise when you follow issues about immigration that a lot of the time the people at the heart of them who are being wrongfully deported, who are having their leave remain challenged, are from African countries, are from Caribbean countries. Do you think there's an element of profiling on the part of the Home Office when it comes to selecting people up for deportation?
There's an element of racism in a lot of things the Home Office does, including deportation.
Can you elaborate on that?
How is it racist?
Yes.
Think about all these people and what colour they are. Come on. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that's fairly self-evident.
I think it's fairly self-evident, but obviously what the Home Office would then say is that we're not racist, we're just picking people up They happen to come from these countries, and it's got nothing to do with deliberately picking people of certain races.
I've been a Member of Parliament for 30 years. One of the biggest parts of my caseload is immigration. And I have no doubt, whether it's the immediate hostile environment or the pattern of the way immigration has worked down the years, that there's a strong element of racism.
Do you support the activism of people like the Stansted 15 who have taken, in the government's view, a quite extreme way to stop a deportation flight?
I support activism. I've been an activist all my life, and I would always support activism. Of course, I don't support people being in breach of the law, but activism is how we defend our liberties.
The current deportation system has come under a lot of criticism for racism, but the Home Office told us they only return those with no legal right to remain in the UK. As the Stansted 15 continued their trial, I travelled to Edinburgh to meet David, who also escaped deportation on the night of the protest.
When you were at Stansted Airport and you were about to board the plane, when did you realise that things weren't going as planned?
Not until we were told there were some disruptions and they'll probably not be going today.
What was the atmosphere like when people found that out?
People were very happy.
Yeah.
I think I was one of the few ones that was angry.
Really?
Yeah.
Why were you angry?
I just wanted closure. I wanted an end to it. I felt like I've been in prison for 7 years.
How did you feel when you found out that there were people who actually stopped the plane?
It was just moving. They changed the way I think about life, about people. Because I've always felt like there was nobody standing up fighting for people like myself.
Have you thought about what your life might have been like if you had been deported that day?
It would be shattered because my family would be broken down. They gave me the chance to fight my case. Without them, I don't think my family would be together today. They were just a blessing.
How do you feel when you hear about the fact that they might face life in prison for what they've done?
I don't know, because it does not make sense. It's crazy. Well, I'm not surprised. I mean, the government is just too callous and they'll go through any length to deliver their cut in immigration.
Do you feel hopeful about the future?
A little bit. A little bit.
Thanks to the Stansted 15, David was able to stay in the country and successfully appeal his deportation. It also meant that he could be by his partner's side as she gave birth to their daughter. 8 people who were scheduled to get on the flight are still fighting to remain in the country, and 3, including David, have been legally allowed to stay. Back in Chelmsford, the Stansted 15 were at the end of a 9-week trial. Emma was now 2 weeks from her due date.
We are a few days, presumably, before the verdict. How are you guys feeling?
Feeling is pretty tense right now.
I think we really feel that we've done everything that we can. And I think, in some ways, ultimately, whatever the verdict, I'm still convinced that we did the right thing.
The trial's been going on for just over 2 months. Obviously, it's been a very long and torturous road to even getting here. How has that affected your lives personally?
Something has happened in almost everybody's life that they've had to deal with in addition to the huge pressure of the trial. So, as you know, my mum was diagnosed with breast cancer 2 weeks before the trial. Things that would normally be stressful, but with the trial on top of that. So, yeah, it's been hard for everyone.
Yeah. You know, you're very pregnant now. Have you thought about how that might affect you and your baby's lives?
Yeah, so I'm, I suppose, a couple of weeks away from my due date now. So for me, it's basically I have to plan to give birth in jail, and you know, for my child to spend the sort of first few months or whatever of its life in a mother and baby unit, which is like a huge thing to have to contemplate and not something I ever expected to do. Yeah, and it's just one of the many ways in which the UK prison and detention system is so unjust.
Whatever the verdict, if we get a guilty verdict, it doesn't stop there. We will be continuing to fight until the hostile environment is overturned. I think we all just feel more committed and more determined than ever, so the fight will go on.
A group of British activists have been convicted for a stunt at London Stansted Airport in which they blocked an aircraft from taking off.
4 days later, the verdict is in. a jury unanimously finds all 15 activists guilty of breaching terror-related laws. The verdict shocks everyone, and there are protests across the country. The Stansted 15 were out on bail pending sentencing, and the next day joined a demonstration outside the Home Office.
I mean, yesterday was just a horrible day, hearing them, say guilty, guilty, guilty over and over in turn. But our lawyers are already working on an appeal. We are going to make sure that not only is this conviction overturned for us, but that they cannot bring this charge against protesters ever again.
It is very concerning indeed to use terror legislation on people who are peacefully protesting. It is quite wrong. It is quite wrong.
Having this conviction for a terror-related charge has really profound implications for our lives, for opportunities to work. Travel will be really restrictive. This charge will cast a long shadow over our lives for years to come. And I think what I'm really concerned about is the threat for democracy of having this type of law used against peaceful protesters. I think we have to be asking really serious questions about the way this country is heading. We have to be asking really serious questions about whether this is the kind of society we want to build. And I think we all have to have answers to those questions, because both of those things pose real dangers to the life and liberty of everyone.